On today's episode, we preview the 2025 Cleveland Guardians with Jeff Ellis of Locked On Guardians. You're listening to the Bucko Banter podcast, brought to you by the Just Baseball Media Network. Cue the music.
Rockin' 101, she compliment my taste. Whiskey in my lemonade, cause I like the way it tastes. Best seats at the Pirates game, they let me run the base. Yeah, my time is like my money, cause I can't afford to waste. Wifey is a lawyer, take my date to my dates. Order steak by the plates, and in case after case, run my race at my pace, clear the grass of the snake.
Welcome back to another team preview. Today we have the Cleveland Guardians, and we're joined by Jeff Ellis of Locked On Guardians. Jeff, welcome on.
Thanks for having me on.
Jeff, let's talk about last year and then the offseason. Then I would like to get a grade from you and see if this is enough to keep the Guardians at the top of the AL Central. Last year, 92-69, first in the Central. Via free agency this offseason, they added left-handed pitcher John Means, Jacob Junis, Paul Sewald, Carlos Santana, Colby Allard to a minor league deal. They re-signed Shane Bieber, Austin Hedges is back, and then via trade, Slade Ciccone, Luis Ortiz in the Pirates deal, Nick Mitchell, and then also in that Luis Ortiz deal, they added Josh Hartle and Michael Kennedy as prospects. And then they lost Connor Gillespie, James Karinchak, Alex Cobb, Matthew Boyd, and then via trade, Miles Straw, Spencer Horwitz, who is now with the Pirates, Josh Naylor, Andres Jimenez, Nick Sandlin, Peter Strzelecki, and Eli Morgan. Listed off a lot of names there. How would you grade this offseason? And is this enough going into 2025 to compete?
On the whole, I'd say it's probably like a C plus B minus off season. Now, if we look beyond the season, I'd probably give it a little bit of a higher grade just because I had serious concerns about Andres Jimenez and the way his bat was going. Now, defensively, he's the best defensive second baseman I've seen, and I got to see Robbie Alomar in Cleveland, so it's a pretty high bar. But Jimenez's bat was a big concern. He's going to make $11 million this year, $15 million next year, and then he's scheduled to make $23 million 3 years in a row. So the moves, I would probably give a solid B overall. But for this season, it does, they're worse at second base. There's no way around it. A lot of it was a weird offseason. I don't think there's any other way around it because there was so many moves on the fringes or just unexpected stuff like the Jimenez deal. It's hard to say, like, is it enough to compete? Because one of the reason they were so good a year ago was like a historically good bullpen. And anyone who follows baseball in depth knows that, while it's not as bad as it used to be, bullpens are notoriously flammable. 1 year to the next, you'll have some degree of regression. And as much as I do like all those guys in the pen, and I think they're going to be good, it's hard to believe you're going to have 5 guys with, sub 2 ERAs. Again, that's just not sustainable. It's a lot of it's going to be, I'm sure every mid-market team is saying the same thing about what young guys can step up, who they can count on from that next wave. It's fun because the Guardians and the Pirates made they flipped Horwitz. Ortiz hasn't had the best camp, I'll be honest. Some Guardians fans are nervous about that, but I think that trade in particular, from just talking to some people, I think a large part of that was about Hartle, because I think the Pirates picked their pockets literally the pick before they would have taken him in the third round. I think that was a big part of that deal. I do think that they really wanted Hartle, and I think Ortiz is the centerpiece. Don't get me wrong. This team needed pitching depth and starting pitching depth potential in the best possible way. But I do think Hartle was equally as, trying to find ways. I'm sure and Mitchell was from that draft as well. So they were definitely targeting some guys they missed in the draft.
I gotta say, I know you're mentioning Josh Hartle. I think Michael Kennedy is the guy that Cleveland fans should be really excited for, because he's the guy that we were excited for. He had a really good camp, or a really good season in Single A. He was a lefty arm out of upstate New York that was going to go to LSU. And man, he showed it. I think he's a guy that, given Cleveland's pitching development, could be something.
Yeah, it was interesting because they made that trade and got Ortiz, and they got 3 guys that I think are arguably in their top 30 prospects. He is, I agree. And he gets forgotten by Cleveland fans very easily because you do have Hartle, because you have all the other moves they've made. But I think he is a nice developmental bet. And the one thing, Cleveland doesn't always win trades. No team does. But the one thing they've been really good about, and I feel like they're probably close to 80% at is identifying and improving pitching and knowing how they can help a guy when they get them to find another gear. It's not always that way. They drafted Logan Allen and we thought he'd add velocity. That hasn't happened. And that's why he's probably more of a quad A type right now. But with someone like Kennedy, when the Guardians target a pitcher, it's the same reason I'm kind of excited about Slade Ciccone is the Rays tried to get him in the middle of the season, and then the Guardians targeted him for Josh Naylor. And when those two teams want a pitcher, that makes me just kind of stand up and be like, what's going on there?
Right. What about this projected lineup, Jeff? On Fangraphs, this is how they have it listed. Want to get your opinion on this, if maybe someone sneaks in or if you disagree with the order of things here. In left field, leading off, Stephen Kwan. Third base, Jose Ramirez. DH, Kyle Manzardo. First base, Carlos Santana. Center field, Lane Thomas. In right field, Will Brennan. Behind the dish, Bo Naylor. At second base, Gabriel Arias. And then at shortstop, Brian Rocchio. Projected bench, Austin Hedges. Got Big Christmas, Tyler Freeman, Daniel Schneemann. How do we feel about 1 through 9? And is there someone that could sneak their way in here come opening day, or something you disagree with?
I think that's probably where we're going to end up. I think they were kind of hoping Juan Brito would do a little more in camp to kind of get there. It was it's hard to remember. I think it's now 3 off seasons ago, right? That they went out and traded Nolan Jones for Brito. That was a deal they went out and made because they really believed in the bat, and he's played well in the minors. He's hit at every level, but it was a rough start to spring. He started to come on a little bit late, so he's the guy that I think they wanted. Gabby Arias at second base I still think was their centerpiece in the Mike Clevenger deal. It has not worked for him. Obviously Josh Naylor, Hedges came in that deal. A lot of players, Cal Quantrill, they had value, but Arias was the gamble on upside. He had power. He, played a really strong shortstop. If they didn't get Jose Ramirez tied to an extension, like I thought he might end up at third base for this team. He had, a really solid season 2 years ago, specifically against right-handed bats, which is not what you expect for a right-handed hitter. Last year was kind of a disaster. We're just seeing if he can hold court or how long of an opportunity he's going to get. He's out of options. So second base is definitely that spot. And then, I think this is a team that's going to platoon a lot. Manzardo is likely to platoon early. You're likely to do the Brennan Noel platoon. Because again, I think you're hoping for Chase DeLauter, but Chase DeLauter, he's missed more games than he's played at this point, going back to college. So as much as like they keep kind of wanting to keep right field open, it's just health. If you're not available, you can't play. And unfortunately for them, Brito didn't deliver, I think, what they wanted, and DeLauter got hurt again.
Before we get into the rotation, I mean, it seems like the same thing that could be said for second base. I know Gabby Arias has that right now, but I mean, Travis Bazzana, does he see Cleveland this year? He seems like that position's being left open. Juan Brito, off, like you said too, they were hoping for more from him camp. And I know he can move around a little bit more than Bazzana, but it seems like they're really banking on seeing Bazzana sooner rather than later, maybe.
They're so conservative. That's always like, I would like to say yes. They tend to move slowly. Like, it still boggles my mind. Like Parker Messick got to AA after Noah Schultz. The polished college kid somehow moves slower than the gigantic raw high school lefty. I think there's definitely a chance. I also wouldn't be shocked if they waited till something like a September call up just to, maximize service time type of deals, or maintain
hey, we know the feeling,
maintain the PPI value. Like it's those games are always going to get played. It's up to Travis though. And it's like, I think they'll give Arias a shot. I think they'll give Brito a shot. And then, they can always have breaking case of emergency. And it just, in some respects, it's about that college group last year is really kind of not performed. There's the Kurtz and the Moores that have looked good, but Bazzana was up and down, and don't look at Condon's numbers even before the wrist injury. It was some of the ugliest I've seen for a high pick. It's a big transition, and if he performs well enough, I think he could force their hand, especially if the other guys don't stand up. But yeah, it's interesting for a team to make the ALCS to then have like 3 or 4 spots where you're like, we're kind of biding time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Pirates have always been the same way in terms of moving prospects, or we're hoping they'd do something different with Connor Griffin because he's more advanced of a prospect that we've seen in a while in our system. But we'll see. We'll see. This rotation, Jeff, we got Tanner Bybee, Ben Lively, Gavin Williams, Luis Ortiz, and Tristan McKenzie rounding out the bottom of that. Shane Bieber, obviously, is coming back from TJ. So is John Means, recently acquired. Slade Ciccone, I believe, is sidelined right now. We've got some other guys coming up like Logan Allen, Doug Nikhazy, Joey Cantillo. Is this how that first five that I listed off? Is that what you see come opening day? I know Tristan McKenzie's had his struggles.
Yeah, I think that's what we see just because, again, it's the options game, right? Like what we talked about with Gabby Arias. McKenzie he's out of options. And yeah, it's been quite a fall. Like I there's no other way to put it. Like start of like 2 years ago, people had him as a dark horse Cy Young guy, and he got hurt that year. He decided not to have surgery, and he just hasn't been the same since. I don't know if last year he seemed healthy, but the confidence wasn't there for his mental, or if maybe he didn't heal quite right. Some guys we take for granted everyone's going to come back the same after surgery or after injury. He didn't even have surgery, but just after injury, and he hasn't. So it's been an ugly spring. It was an ugly season last year. They had a point. It's in some ways like I have more faith in this team because they made the postseason last year, in spite of the fact that like Carlos Carrasco, Logan Allen, and Tristan McKenzie, when they were sent down, were 3 of the 10 worst pitchers in the American League by FIP at the time. Like they were just not performing well. I think that's where the rotation is going to go. I think right now the biggest concerns for fans are McKenzie and Ortiz because they both kind of were up and down this spring. Gavin Williams has been on like every list of breakout pitchers. And Lively likely overperform, but he should be at least a solid back end. And then hopefully Ciccone gets healthy. You mentioned all of those players. On top of that, like Austin Peterson kind of had a breakout for them last year, is moving up through the system, and Parker Messick just showed up in the breakout game, and his velocity has taken a jump since even last year. So he's definitely someone to kind of pay attention to, I think, right now.
Let's talk about this bullpen. Obviously, in the closer slot, Emmanuel Clase, and then the setup role, they have projected Cade Smith and Hunter Gaddis. You added Paul Sewald, Tim Herron, Andrew Walters. Colby Allard has some good stuff in middle relief from the left-hand side, and then Jacob Junis. How do we feel about this group? Obviously, the bullpen's a rotating door. We don't know what you're going to get throughout the season, but just based on the core guys, how do we feel about this squad?
I still feel really good. I do think like – Class A, it's 3 out of 4 years. It's a sub-2 ERA. Like that just, I don't like, maybe I'm a homer, but you don't see that in a lot of relievers. And I know the postseason wasn't ideal, but it was kind of weird. Like they asked a lot of guys to do things they'd never done before. And I think that's hard. Cade Smith is really good. Like for people who don't know the Guardians, he was phenomenal last year. Like he even surprised those of us who've been following him in the minors. Like he never showed command and control the way he had. I don't know what they worked with him on last offseason, but that just allowed all of his stuff to play up. You look at Hunter Gaddis, he's the one I'm kind of eyeing as a potential regression candidate, but he's always had like 2 really strong pitches. He's got just a changeup that's got crazy amounts of movement that makes it hard to pick up. Tim Herron was a kid who was a high school quarterback and kind of committed to baseball late for college. So he's kind of a late developmental guy out of Indiana program in general on the Big Ten. Those are kind of your main pieces. And then Sewald's just kind of fun because his bullpen coach in Seattle was Stephen Vogt. So Vogt went to bat, or I guess that's a bad analogy in this case, but went up and said that he'd like to have him, and he slotted in. And Andrew Walters, I know a lot of Cleveland fans, it's like he was probably the top relief prospect in his draft class, like as a late second round pick. Like he was
a Miami guy, right?
Yeah. A closer in training. Like some people were putting a 70 grade fastball on him that year with the change being another plus offering. So they're I don't know if I want to say lucky if it's development. They have a lot of pieces. So if someone gets hurt, someone doesn't perform, it's just kind of like next guy up mentality. And then I have to mention it because he's just a great story. They added to their offseason Nick Enright to the roster, who they previously lost in the Rule 5 draft to Miami at one point. And unfortunately for Nick, he was diagnosed with cancer when he got selected last time. So he has fought and overcome cancer, and should finally make his major league debut this year, which is just, everyone loves those stories. Like, and he's a great kid. by all accounts, everyone talks him up in the minors, but he's kind of their next guy up in terms of depth. And they've got a few other interesting arms. The bullpen should still remain the strength of this team.
Nice. Yeah, we can always count on Cleveland pumping through new bullpen guys every year. I feel like Cade Smith last year, maybe Andrew Walters this year. We'll see.
We didn't. Eric Sabrowski was hurt. I forgot. We should probably throw him the lefty breakout.
Sure.
He's not listed because of the health, but he would be he'd be another back end guy who will debut this year. So just to throw his name in.
Nice. So how about some prospects? I know we mentioned a few like Chase DeLauder, Travis Pizzona, but who's a prospect or two that you're excited to watch this year, or you think that could make an impact on this big league team?
Yeah, I think just in terms of the ones I'm most excited to see, Jason Churio stands out. He got hurt towards the end of last year. I think if he hadn't hurt himself, he'd be talked about a lot more. He also looked really good in the spring breakout game. He's another guy who a lot of people are kind of jumping on that bandwagon right now. Younger brother of, more famous, but still he's not his brother. He's a different prospect. He's a very good prospect in his own right. Angel Janau, or Angel Janau, I should say, has what appears to be all the tools. Like 2 years ago, he had kind of minors, but he's got great exit velos. He's got a strong arm. He runs well. He's really a guy who last year popped across the board in terms of just an interesting, fun prospect. And Braylon Doughty is maybe the guy I'm most excited to see pitch. We haven't seen a lot of high school guys. He was smaller righty, super athletic, played a bunch of sports. Has all of the traits you look for a guy who's got more growth potential. Like not just like what his velocity is, or he spins his secondary stuff well. The athleticism, which I always stand. I think athleticism for pitchers is underrated because I think that's what's going to help guys stay healthier longer. And just being the multi-sport guy. And I don't know. I always think it's great when kids are focusing on multiple sports. I think that also helps. So they've got a lot of, fun guys on top of, the bigger names like Ralphie Velasquez, who was in the Futures game last year, and Baz. But it's as deep as I've seen, I would argue, in the minor leagues for them in the last 10 to 15 years I've covered them.
Jeff, what about a pick to click? Somebody that's on the current roster going into opening day that's going to help this Guardians team take it to the next level?
I think the guy most fans would jump on is Brian Rocchio. I think for them to be the most successful, it would be Bo Naylor. I don't know if it's going to, but like getting Bo Naylor of the expectation, his defense really blossomed last year, but his offense went backwards. But Rocchio, by advanced metrics, was really good defensively. Occasional bonehead play. That's the thing that kind of stands out. So a lot of fans, myself included, would get on him, but he's so clean most of the time that you only notice when he makes a mistake. Had a strong postseason. During the season, it was rough offensively. It was a 71 WRC plus. So if you look at just an improvement to average, it would be a huge just lineup improvement there. And they really haven't gotten offense and defense at shortstop in a very long time. Like when they had Rosario, it was offense, but the defensive metrics weren't great. It's been a while since, it's been since Lindor, let's be honest, right. They've had consistency on both sides at that position. So that's probably the one they think has their best chance. He settled in a year later. Hopefully he was really good with, controlling the zone and not expanding in AAA 2 years ago. And last year in the majors, he expanded a lot more. So that's not really his game. But now that he's comfortable, he's set. There's even talk of him as like a leader in camp. Even though it's his second year, the hope is that he'll settle in and be, that plus defender with about a league average bat.
Jeff, before we let you go, can we get a 2025 prediction? It could be team or player oriented.
Okay, let me think for 1 second. When
and
I think
also,
about the team,
how scared are you for Kenny Pickett? No, I'm kidding. You don't think it's
I got to be honest. I kind of stopped following the Browns a few years ago when
you should, especially now. You should
another quarterback choice where I was I'm out for a bit.
That's a good call on your part.
I know that can be a lightning rod, so I don't want to inflict that on you guys.
That's all right.
But I think with this team, I'm going to predict that Lane Thomas has a year to make himself a lot of money. I think he was hurt to start last year. Now, his all-star year, you can look at the BABIP and see there was some luck involved. But last year, he was close to league average. The year before that, he was an all-star. I think he'll find his space in the middle of that. For this team, I'm going to predict they make the postseason, but I'm going to predict it's a wild card. I think the AL Central is tough. For as much as people like to still rag on that division, it's like we don't have unbalanced schedules anymore. It wasn't just that everyone beat up on the White Sox. It's 3 young emerging teams, and then the Twins, who, if they get healthy, would probably walk away with the division, I feel like. But health is just, I mean, Royce Lewis is already hurt. We know Buxton's only going to play half the games this year. If there's a world where like Buxton Lewis played, 160 games and Correa did as well, like I think objectively that's the team to beat, but health just isn't going to be there. At least I assume. I could be wrong. Maybe it's the year where it all comes together, but I think it's going to be a tough division. I think Cleveland's has enough stability and then some interesting young guys close enough to help them make it as, like I said, as a wild card pick is what I'm thinking. They made it last year with a mediocre offense and some of the worst starting pitching in the American League, which is not what you expect for Cleveland. So I think that gives them that runway to make it back.
Jeff, appreciate you joining the show. Where can our listeners find your work at?
You can follow me on Locked On Guardians, just as a fun just baseball thing. I think I put Aram on screen for the first time back when I had to. I think that was his first video podcast. I've been there that long.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Yeah, back when he was the Marlins guy. But before I do occasional writing. You can always find out on my Twitter when I do it at Jeff MLB Draft. Mostly when I write, it's about draft stuff because that's my fun area outside of talking Guardians of Major League Baseball. But yeah, you can follow most of my content over at Locked On Guardians.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on, Jeff. And hopefully we can maybe do this again soon.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me.
Best seats at the Pirates game, they let me run the base. Yeah, my time is like my money, cause I can't afford to waste. Wifey is a lawyer, take my date to my dates, or the steak by the plates and